Arizona Territory, 1879. The sun was already high above the red rock cliffs of Prescott when Loretta Nells felt the iron grip of her father drag her through the chapel doors. The lace of her wedding dress scratched against her skin, the collar too tight, the hem too long. Her hands trembled beneath white gloves that felt like shackles. She couldn't look at the man waiting at the altar. Raymond Cutter, a land baron twice her age, with a silver beard and a belly heavy with whiskey and pride. He had paid for her in cattle and water rights. Her father had accepted without a pause. "You will stand there and smile," her father hissed under his breath, pushing her toward the front pews. "You owe this family your obedience." "I do not love him," she whispered, but her voice vanished under the creaking floorboards and the murmurs of the gathered crowd. Then the chapel doors slammed open. Bootsteps echoed. Dust swirled in the sunbeams. Every head turned. A tall cowboy stepped into the light, his hat low over his brow, a rifle slung across his back and dust caked on his boots. His eyes landed on Loretta and stayed there. "Zeke Granger," someone muttered near the front. "That's Zeke Granger." Loretta's knees nearly buckled. She hadn't seen him in 5 years. Not since he left this town with nothing but a horse, a saddle, and a promise that he'd come back for her. But he never had. Until now. Zeke's voice rang clear. "This wedding is not going to happen." The room erupted. Her father lunged toward him. Raymond Cutter roared, red-faced and furious, but Zeke did not flinch. His hand rested near his holster, but he did not draw. "Not yet. She doesn't love him," Zeke said, eyes never leaving Loretta. "And she sure as hell doesn't want to marry him." "Get out of here, boy," Cutter barked. "This is not your business." "It is," Zeke said. "It always was." Loretta's heart pounded in her chest. She felt the pull of everything: her father's hand on her arm, Cutter's glare, the judgment of the town. But stronger than all of it was the way Zeke looked at her. Like she was a person, not property. Like he still knew her. "I'll walk out with you," she said, her voice steady now. Her father grabbed her arm, but she pulled free. Zeke stepped forward and held out his hand. She took it without hesitation. Together they walked out of the chapel into the blinding sun, leaving gasps and shouts behind. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of town. There, behind the old mill, Zeke pulled her behind the shed where no one could see. "Why now?" she asked, breathless. "Why today?" "I tried," he said, voice low. "I came back once 3 years ago. You were gone. Your father said you'd married and moved to Flagstaff. That was a lie." He nodded slowly. "I figured. Why did you come back again?" He looked at her like she was the only thing real in the world. "Because I could not forget you. And when I heard Cutter was marrying a girl half his age, I prayed it was not you. But when I saw your name on the notice board at the post office, I rode all night." Loretta blinked hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. "You came all night just to stop a wedding," he said. "And take you away, if you will let me." He reached for her hand again, slower this time. She gave it to him. "I do not have much," he said. "A small homestead near the Verde River. 2 cows. A stubborn mule. But it is yours if you want it." Loretta stared at the horizon. Smoke curled from chimneys in the distance. Somewhere behind her, the life she was forced into was unraveling. But ahead there was sky. And freedom. And Zeke. "I want it," she said. They rode out that afternoon, her on his spare mare, him on a roan gelding. They crossed dry riverbeds and crested sandy hills. When the sun dipped low, they stopped at a bluff overlooking a wide stretch of wild land. He built a fire. She sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. "Do you hate me?" he asked, voice almost a whisper. "For not coming back sooner?" Loretta shook her head. "No. I just needed you now. And you came." He nodded, eyes on the flames. "I will never be late again." She leaned her head on his shoulder. He rested his cheek on the top of her hair. That night, under a blanket of stars, with the fire crackling beside them and the desert wind soft against their skin, Loretta Nells let herself believe in a different life. One she chose. One with him. By dusk, they reached a shallow bend in the Verde River where the cottonwoods stood tall and bare-limbed, their bark pale as bone in the fading light. Zeke dismounted first, tying the reins to a crooked post set into the earth beside the lean-to he'd built last spring. Loretta slid down carefully, her legs sore and stiff from hours in the saddle. He offered an arm, and she took it without hesitation. The land around them was quiet, save for the trickle of water and the distant cry of a hawk. 3 chickens scratched in the dirt near a coop patched with old wagon boards. A dog, gray and lean, rose from the porch and watched her with calm eyes, tail flicking once. Zeke stepped ahead and opened the cabin door. "It ain't much, but it's mine. Yours too, if you want it." Inside, the walls were thick with adobe and chinked timber, the air holding the faint scent of sage and old smoke. A cot stood beneath the single window, its quilt creased but clean. A small table rested beside a stone hearth, with a dented kettle hanging over cold ash. She walked in slowly, her fingers brushing a shelf lined with jars dried beans, some cornmeal, a few sprigs of lavender hung to cure. Her eyes drifted to a carved wooden box, the lid worn smooth. "Made that for you," he said from behind her. "Back when I thought I'd come back in time." She lifted the lid. Inside lay a pair of bone-hair combs, polished and delicate. "You made these?" He nodded once. "From a steer I raised. Took near a year to shape them right." Loretta closed the lid with care. "You remembered what I liked." "I remembered everything," he said. The silence stretched between them, not heavy, not hollow. Just room enough for what hadn't been said yet. She turned to face him. "If I'm to stay, I want to work." "You'll have to," he said plainly. "Ain't much use for idleness out here. Fence needs mending. That mule's half wild. And the roof leaks when it rains. I can sew, cook, tend a garden. I've done worse than that." He let out a breath through his nose. "You'll find no one to please out here but yourself. I'd rather that than live under someone else's rule." He looked at her then, really looked. Not like a woman who needed saving, but someone who might hold her own beside him. "You're not afraid?" "I've already lived afraid. That part's over." He turned away and pulled a split log from beside the hearth, setting it into place and striking flint to kindling tucked beneath. The fire caught slow, the glow rising up to warm the dim space. He brought out a tin of beans and set them near the flame. She removed her gloves, fingers stiff from the day's ride, and laid them across her lap. When the food was ready, they ate in silence, sharing a chip bowl between them, passing it back and forth without ceremony. No words needed. Later, she stood at the threshold. The wind had picked up, rustling through the grass with a hollow hush. The moon hung low, heavy with light. He joined her, arms folded. "You can have the bed. I'll take the floor." She shook her head. "We'll trade off. I'm not made of glass." He glanced at her, something like quiet amusement in his eyes. "Suit yourself?" She leaned against the doorway, watching the silvered landscape. "What made you stay out here? All this time? I wanted a place I didn't have to leave. And now?" He looked at her, voice low. "Now I've got a reason to stay." She didn't answer, didn't need to. The stillness between them said enough. That night she lay on the cot with her boots tucked beside her, the quilt pulled to her chin. He slept near the fire on a buffalo robe, one arm folded beneath his head. In the dark, she listened to the wind against the walls, the steady rhythm of his breath. There was no fear here. No weight pressing down on her chest. For the first time in years, she did not dread the morning. Out there, beyond the cottonwoods and river bend, the world would wake cruel and uncertain. But here, inside a cabin built by hand and hope, Loretta Nells found something close to peace. The morning came soft and clear, the kind that eased into the world without fuss. A light frost clung to the grass outside, brittle under Loretta's boots as she stepped out to fetch water from the barrel. Zeke had already been up, she could tell from the coals stirred in the hearth and the faint scent of brewed coffee. He was nowhere in sight, but one of the hens clucked low near the porch, and she spotted fresh boot tracks in the dirt leading toward the creek. She filled the tin basin and returned inside. The cabin held the hush of early light, the kind that made everything feel new but not unfamiliar. A folded shirt hung over the back of a chair, patched at the elbow. She touched it with her fingertips, not for long. Then she set the water near the fire to warm and began kneading cornmeal into cakes. By the time she finished, Zeke returned, sleeves rolled to his forearms, carrying a pair of trout strung on a willow branch. "River's still full enough," he said, laying the fish on the table. "They bite fast when the water runs cold." She handed him a cloth to wipe his hands. "You always this quiet in the mornings?" He shrugged. "Used to talking to myself. Takes some adjusting." "I don't mind quiet," she said, setting the skillet over the fire. "Only if it feels lonesome." He sat, scraping the scales from the trout with steady strokes. "I've had years of lonesome. Doesn't sit right now you're here." Loretta turned the cakes, letting them brown along the edges. "Did you build all of this alone?" "Took time. Hauled the beams in from farther north. Neighbors helped raise the roof when I traded them a steer. The rest I worked through one winter." She nodded. "It's well made." Zeke glanced at her, then back to the fish. "You planning to stay more than a few days?" "I'm not planning to leave." He didn't answer right away. She plated the food, setting the fish beside the cakes, and they ate at the table, chairs turned slightly to face the window. After a while, Zeke pushed his plate back. "There's a spare field down past the ridge. I haven't tilled it since summer. Could be good for planting come spring." She traced the rim of her cup. "What grows best here?" "Beans do fine. Squash if the rains come right. Corn if you've got patience." "I've got that." The dog barked once outside. Zeke stood, crossing to the door. "Rider coming in." Loretta joined him. A man on a bay horse approached slow, hand raised in greeting. He wore a wide hat and a coat dusty at the cuffs. Zeke stepped off the porch. "Morning, Amos." "Zeke," the man said, reining in. "Heard some noise in town yesterday. Thought I might come check?" Zeke nodded once. "She's here. You can see that." Amos glanced toward Loretta, then back at Zeke. "There'll be talk. Cutter won't let this lie easy." "He can talk all he wants," Zeke said. "He steps foot on my land, he'll answer for it." Amos shifted in the saddle. "Just wanted to know where things stood." "They stand?" Amos dipped his head. "Then I'll be on my way." They watched him ride off, the horse's hooves dull against the earth. Zeke lingered a moment before returning to the porch. Loretta spoke low. "You think he'll come?" "Cutter doesn't take insult lightly. But he won't come alone and he won't come fast. He's used to others doing his fighting." She folded her arms. "Then we'll be ready." He looked at her then, eyes unreadable. "I meant to shield you from all that. I didn't come here to be shielded. I came to stand beside you." The wind moved gently through the trees, lifting the hem of her dress. Zeke looked away, jaw tightening. "You ever shoot before?" "Once. My brother taught me when we were children. I hit a fence post." "Barely." He nodded. "We'll practice. If he comes, he won't find us unprepared." She stepped closer. "You're not just trying to protect me out of guilt?" "No," he said. "Guilt's a weight. This is something else." She held his gaze. "I want to understand what it is." He didn't answer right away. Then he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, his fingers careful. "I want to build something that lasts," he said. "If you'll help me." She didn't speak. Just laid her hand over his. That afternoon, they worked side by side in the barn, mending a broken gate. Loretta held the boards steady while Zeke hammered. When her arms ached, he wordlessly took over. Later, she climbed the ladder to the loft and handed down old harnesses, sorting what could be salvaged. They ate supper by lantern light, the shadows long on the walls. When she rose to clear the plates, Zeke caught her wrist. "You're not a guest here." She tilted her head. "Then what am I?" He stood, not letting go. "You're home." And Loretta, for the first time in her life, believed it. The late February sun stretched long across the ridge when Zeke handed Loretta the rifle. It was older, stock-worn smooth, but the barrel clean and oiled. They stood in the clearing behind the barn, dry grass rustling at their knees, a row of bottles lined up along a fence rail 50 paces out. He glanced sideways. "You favor your left or right eye?" "Right," she said, lifting the rifle with steady hands. "But I've never aimed at glass." "It's not the glass you're learning for," he said. "It's learning how to stand still when your heart's going fast." She braced the stock against her shoulder, narrowing her eyes. Her first shot pitched low, kicking up dust. The second nicked the post. The third clipped the edge of a bottle, shattering it in a sharp, bright burst. She lowered the rifle, blinking against the sun. "That one was luck." "Maybe," Zeke said, walking forward to reset the bottles. "But your hands didn't shake." By the time they finished, her shoulder ached and her ears rang faintly from the echo, but the fence rails stood empty. She exhaled, drawing a hand across her brow. The air smelled faintly of powder and mesquite. That night, Zeke lit a lantern while Loretta dried her hands and folded the towel over the basin. He reached into a crate near the hearth and pulled out a wrapped bundle she hadn't seen before. He set it on the table. "Found this last fall. Traded 2 pelts for it up in Jerome." She untied the string. Inside lay a length of blue calico, soft but strong woven. Enough for a dress, maybe 2. "I thought you might want to sew something for yourself," he said. "Something that don't belong to anyone else's choosing." Her throat tightened, but she kept her voice even. "You thinking of dressing me like a ranch wife already?" He leaned back in the chair. "I'm thinking of you however you want to be seen." The next morning, Loretta took the calico outside and shook it out in the breeze, pinning it to the line with small wooden clips Zeke had carved. The fabric rippled in the wind, catching the light like water. She stood a long while, watching it move, before turning back toward the house. Inside, she cleared space on the table and spread out a pair of shears, chalk, and a spool of thread. Her fingers moved from habit, cutting clean lines, folding edges, pressing seams with the heel of her palm. Zeke returned near midday, boots muddy, arms full of kindling. He paused at the doorway. "You always work that fast?" "I had to," she said, not looking up. "Back home, there wasn't time to do things slow." He set the wood down beside the hearth. "You've got time now." She didn't answer, but her hands slowed, drawing the needle through the cloth with more care than before. That evening, they sat out beneath the porch eaves. The moon was thinner than before, a pale slice above the trees. Zeke sharpened a blade across a whetstone while Loretta hemmed the last sleeve. She set it aside and looked out into the dark. "You ever want to leave this place?" "Sometimes," he said. "When the river runs dry or the mule bites through the fence line. But it always calls me back." "Why?" He paused, sheathing the knife. "Because it don't expect anything from me I'm not already willing to give." She turned toward him. "I think that's the first time I've heard you say something close to poetry." He half grinned, eyes on the horizon. "Don't get used to it." They rose early the next day. Zeke saddled the mule and 2 horses. "We'll need to ride into town," he said. "Mails do, and I want to ask about a new plow. If you're coming, wear something plain." She did. Braided her hair back and buttoned an old wool coat over her dress. They rode side by side, the trail winding through dry brush and over low ridges. As they neared town, she noticed a shift in his posture, shoulders drawn tighter. "Someone going to say something you don't want me hearing?" she asked. "Likely," he said. "But it ain't for your concern. It is if I'm beside you." He didn't respond, but the line of his jaw eased slightly. At the general store, they tied off the horses. Loretta followed him inside, scanning the shelves while Zeke spoke in low tones with the shopkeeper. A few heads turned. One woman near the bolts of fabric narrowed her eyes and muttered something under her breath. Loretta didn't flinch. She walked past her and picked out a skein of heavy thread, laying it on the counter with a quiet confidence that made the woman turn away. Zeke joined her, setting down a tin of nails and a coil of rope. On the way out, he paused by the postboard and tore down a notice. She caught a glimpse of the name, Cutter, before he folded it and tucked it in his coat. They didn't speak of it on the ride home. That night, the wind blew hard from the north, rattling the shutters and sending a branch thudding against the roof. Zeke sat at the table, going over a worn ledger, while Loretta patched a tear in his undershirt. She looked up suddenly. "I never thanked you." He glanced over. "For what?" "For stopping a life I didn't choose. For giving me the chance to start another." He closed the ledger. "You don't owe me thanks." "I don't," she agreed. "But it's still true." He stood and crossed to her, taking the shirt gently from her lap and setting it aside. He didn't touch her hand, didn't speak. Just looked at her like she was something solid, something that wouldn't vanish come morning. She met his gaze. "I want to stay." "You already have," he said. And the wind outside, though sharp, could not touch the warmth that grew between them. Not rushed. Not spoken aloud. But certain now and steady. The snow came unexpected that March, hushed and heavy, blanketing the ridge and flattening the world under a skin of white before morning could fully rise. Loretta stood wrapped in Zeke's second coat, one hand braced against the doorframe, watching the flurries drift down like ash. The chickens huddled under the coop's slanted roof, heads tucked. The mule stayed quiet, a dark shape in the lean-to. Zeke moved behind her, setting a tin bowl of oats on the table. "Storm's early. That sky's thick out toward the west. I've never seen snow lay this far south," she said, stepping back and with a shake of her sleeves. "Not like this. Don't usually. Last time was 7 years back. Froze the creek solid for 2 days. He pulled a chair toward the hearth and nodded toward her boots. "You'll want those dry before night." She sat and unlaced them, laying them near the fire without fuss. They'd spent the last weeks building a rhythm that didn't ask for words. She swept the floors while he split kindling. He mended harness straps while she boiled broth and stitched the calico into a dress that now hung by the window, nearly finished. But that morning, with the snow piling fast and the road to town sealed in white, something in the quiet shifted. Zeke turned from the hearth. "We'll need to watch the roof. Wet snow's heavy. If it settles too thick, the rafters might sag." "I'll help," she said. He hesitated. "You don't have to climb up there. I've climbed worse." He studied her face, then gave a slow nod. They bundled in scarves and gloves and stepped out together, boots crunching through the drift. He hoisted the ladder and braced it against the eaves while she fetched a long-handled broom. Once she'd steadied herself on the roof, he climbed after her, boots careful on the slats. She worked in silence, pushing snow down in wide arcs, her cheeks flushed red with cold. He watched her a long moment before speaking. "I never asked what you planned to do before your father arranged that marriage." She paused, leaning on the broom. "Didn't get far enough to plan. I was teaching letters to the neighbor's youngest. Sewing for coin when I could. Saving for a room of my own. Would you have stayed in Prescott?" She shook her head. "No. I'd have gone north. Maybe Holbrook. I heard they were hiring women to teach school there." He cleared a stretch of snow beside her. "You'd have made a fine teacher." She looked at him, the wind tugging strands of hair loose from her braid. "You think so? You've got a way of seeing people. Makes them want to try harder." She didn't speak for a moment. Then, "And you? What would you have done if I hadn't come with you?" He didn't look at her. "Probably stayed up here until the land dried or I did." When the roof was cleared, they climbed down together. The cold had soaked through their gloves by then, their breath clouding in the still air. Inside, she hung their scarves near the stove while he fetched dry socks. By afternoon, the cabin held the scent of simmering beans and fresh wood smoke. Loretta sat at the table, needle in hand, finishing the last hem of the dress. Zeke whittled something at the hearth, wood shavings curling around his boots. She looked up. "You've been working at that for days. What is it?" He turned the piece toward her. A small carved bird, wings spread, tail fanned. Not perfect, but shaped with care. "For the shelf," he said. "When you finish the dress." She set her needle down. "You remember the bird I painted on your old saddlebag?" He nodded. "Still got it." "Packed in the trunk. I always thought it looked more like a crow." "Maybe. But it flew straight." Later, as dusk folded in and the wind faded to a hush, they sat close on the bench near the fire. Loretta leaned into him, her head resting just below his collarbone. He wrapped an arm around her, hand resting lightly at her waist. She spoke first. "I never thought I'd grow into a life like this. All the stillness. The trust." Zeke's voice was quiet. "I didn't think I'd deserve one." She tilted her chin up to meet his eyes. "You do. You always did." He kissed her then, slow and certain, like it had waited its turn through all the years apart. Her fingers curled into his shirt, and he held her like she'd never be taken from him again. That night they moved with quiet understanding, her dress folded over the chair, his shirt unbuttoned slow beneath her hands. There was no rush, no noise. Just breath and warmth and the long, steady knowing of two people who had waited through too much to waste another moment. Morning brought clear skies and a sheen of melting frost. Birds returned to the trees, cautious but in song. The mule brayed once, impatient. Loretta stepped out wrapped in a shawl as Zeke hauled water from the well. She called out, "I've been thinking." He poured the bucket into the trough. "Dangerous habit. I'd like to build a second room. Just off the back. For sewing, maybe a cradle one day." He turned, wiping his hands on his trousers. "You sure?" She nodded. "I've never been more." He crossed to her, slid an arm around her shoulder, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Then we'll start with the frame next week." They married that spring beneath the cottonwoods, their vows spoken plain, without crowd or preacher, just hands joined and hearts steady. A neighbor rode out to witness, and the mule brayed through the whole thing like it had something to say. Months passed, and the cabin grew. A second room rose with adobe walls and new rafters. Loretta planted squash and beans in neat rows, her hands strong and sure. Zeke built a larger henhouse, then a porch swing. At night, they sat together beneath the stars, her head resting on his shoulder, his hand tracing idle circles along her back. By winter's return, the land around them had settled into something whole. No debts, no fear. Just warmth through the walls and love folded into every corner. They were no longer waiting for another life. They were living it. Together.